This is a chart I created to help you understand one of the easiest ways to analyze art is through form and content. Form is what we see. It's the style, it's the mood, it's the technique, it's all the visual elements. Everything that we see falls under a big category that we can call formal analysis. Content is the meaning behind the work. So it could be the politics going on at the time, the history, even what was going on in the artist's life at the time. Any type of subject that's addressed in the artwork is also part of what we call content, the meaning behind the work. So when you're reading your textbook, you'll notice that the author does the same thing. The author will talk to you a little bit about how it was created, and then they'll go into why it was created, form and content. Once you get used to breaking down your analysis this way, it gets easier to write about art. So let's try it. This is the Good Samaritan window, a little section of the Good Samaritan window at Chartres Cathedral. And it was made with the stained glass and glass painting technique. Notice the details in the faces. Definitely not stained glass. You cannot cut glass that precise and detailed. So they used a type of enamel paint that was baked onto the glass. And then they fused it with all these little tin foils around it, what we call tinning. Wrap metal around the edges of the glass, and then fuse those pieces of glasses together like with lead solder, very much like a jigsaw puzzle. Fits together quite nicely. So anyhow, this is the stained glass technique that they use. They use glass painting on all the little details, and then the big pieces were actually some of the clearest stained glass that they had at this time. So they're really perfecting glass coloring at this time. Now I'm seeping over into content. Everything I've told you so far has been what we call formal analysis. I could also state that, of course, we see a tree here with a snake wrapped around it, and a man on one side with a halo around, and on the other side you'd see it looks like two figures. And of course, this is all the formal analysis, what we see. We're not going into the meaning behind it. The meaning behind it, of course, is the content. So part of the content, you could describe the story, of course. So it represents the story of the Garden in Eden, and of course the expulsion of Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden after eating the fruit from the tree of knowledge. So that's some of the content behind it. Other content behind it, you could discuss that this was done during the Gothic era. And of course, at that time, they didn't have the word Gothic. Gothic, they called it modern style or French style since it started in France. That's definitely part of the meaning behind the artwork that we're seeing here. Another part of content that we could cover was the fact that this was made collectively by a group of artisans in a medieval guild. One of the ways that you could learn stained glass is to study under one of these master crafts people, and they would teach you their skills, and you would work for them doing the dirty work, and then after you learned, then you could become a master crafts person too. So that also is the content behind it. Medieval guilds at this time were very helpful, and that's one of the major ways that they learned art, because there is a limited amount of schools and training other than guilds at this time. So that's also part of content, the meaning behind the work. Chartres Cathedral has all kinds of interesting content behind the actual cathedral. So you could talk a little bit about where this work was placed as well, as far as the meaning behind it. So for form, you would discuss how it was made and the techniques that were done. For content, you could talk about the biblical story here. You could talk about the building where it was placed, or you could talk about the group of artisans that made it. All of that is part of the history. And then, of course, you could also talk about the Gothic era and the meaning behind the Gothic era that influenced this type of art. For instance, another important fact that would apply to this piece was this is didactic, meaning we are teaching through images. Most people at this time were illiterate, so they depended on images like this in order to understand the Bible. When they went to church, they would study these, and a lot of these windows read like a comic strip. This is the cathedral, or the people behind the cathedral, the creators, trying to teach the illiterate masses of these stories from the Bible.